Serious. Park rangers, fish and wildlife worker, hikers of Reddit. What is the weirdest or most unexplainable thing that you've ever seen? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I was doing some field work for my master's thesis on the local river habitat. I have trail cameras out to catch wildlife. On my way to one of the cameras I was walking, I heard leaves rustling from the top of a tree, and then a dead deer fell from the tree on the ground. I made some noise and walked away. I thought it was either a bobcat or a mountain lion, and I didn't want to investigate in case the animal was still there. As far as I know, bobcats don't climb on trees to carry their prey, and this was a whitetail that looked pretty heavy. I went there a few hours later, and the carcass was gone. As per mountain lions, we only have rumors of one around our parts, and although I saw tracks, they were not near the camera. I once escorted a church group, ages young kids through adults, on a weekend overnight outing to a camp in the Poconos. The camp was set at the confluence of two streams and was somewhat rugged. The group had lots to do: a climbing wall, boating, hiking, sports, all kinds of stuff, including a nature center and little museum. The nature center had interactive displays, fish tanks, small animals, etc., and a touch table, a large wooden table with sides on which was scattered all sorts of artifacts the guest could pick up and handle. These items included deer antlers, bones, turtle shells, feathers, arrowheads, and pottery, rocks, seeds and nuts, tanned hides, etc. Little kids especially loved it. All of the items were found by guests or staff while out in the camp and returned to the nature center. I handled the items also, and I noticed one bone had a really odd shape. I am an environmental scientist by profession and an outdoorsman and naturalist for fun, and can generally recognize what bone came from what parts of what animals. The bone was a human mandible, the lower jaw bone of a person. It was severely worn and smooth and had no teeth, but easily recognizable as such. It had been there for years, handled by thousands of people, and no one noticed or at least reported it. I reported it to the director, who removed it and notified the state police. They investigated it. It seemed very old, and no one was reported missing in the immediate area, so the camp was allowed to keep it. Possible explanation: the facility was the site of a timbering and ice harvesting camp up until the 1920s, and may have been the remains of a worker who died and was buried right there. But who knows the real story? And as far as I know, it's still on the table. I was a seasonal ranger back in the late 90s whilst in college. We got a call about a woman screaming off one of the biking trails. We searched for hours and never found any evidence of foul play, so we decided to head back. We were a good 5 miles off the trail by this point when we stumbled upon a couple acres of marijuana. A heavily booby-trapped couple of acres of marijuana, a dozen bear traps, a shotgun rigged to go off when you walk into a string. There was a 10-foot deep pit covered with branches with spikes at the bottom. We later discovered there were dead deer that fell in and died. We got lucky it wasn't dark when we stumbled upon this, otherwise I'm pretty sure one of us would have died. Lots of agencies got involved. We never determined who was screaming, nor did we find out who owned the plot of weed. Why they would booby-trap the shit out of it was mind-boggling. Potentially killing someone over some plants, some pretty fucked up, but no one was hurt from it as far as I know. This was a very interesting job. I wouldn't mind doing it again at some point. Not in that profession, but grew up in very rural Arkansas. Once stayed in a tent in the backyard with a friend when we were about 12, camping. I had a dog named Shadow that stayed outside, and she was the bestest girl. My backyard butted up against hundreds of acres of woods, so coyotes and bobcats were pretty common, but never came onto the property because of Shadow. That night, as we stayed in the tent reading scary stories and talking girl talk, we heard what sounded like a woman screaming not that far away. I froze because my dad had told me that mountain lions sounded exactly like that, and I wasn't sure we'd even make it back to the back door if we made a run for it. My friend was terrified and thought a woman needed help, and I was trying to tell her that we had no neighbors for miles, and what I thought it probably was when Shadow started growling just outside of the tent. I've probably never been so terrified before or since. She started barking and moving away from the tent in one direction, and that's when my dad threw open the back door and did one of those high-pitched dad whistles and ran towards the tent, yelling us to get out, gun in hand. We ended up sleeping inside that night. A few weeks later, when we were headed down to the gravel mine for target practice, a massive pit in the ground about a mile away from our home, and we saw a mountain lion on the other side, and Dad murmured to me that it must be my friend. It was massive and terrifying and beautiful, and I haven't ever seen another in person. When I was 11, I went tent camping with teenage cousins on the Sioux Reservation. They lived on the reservation. We were in an area we had followed several trails to find. We were inside the tent, and they were telling me a story about shapeshifters as the sun was going down. Suddenly, there was a beautiful glow, like when the sun bursts out through the clouds and makes everything golden. It highlighted shapes going by the tent and casting shadows, and started as a nice experience. Then there was a loud boom, and the shadow of a large bird came right at us, and the tent fell down on top of us. They were genuinely scared, which made me even more terrified. We hightailed it back through those trails and went home in the dark, barely able to breathe. We were going so fast. I still don't know what happened or why, but I can tell you, I don't go tent camping. I went backpacking for 3 days with some friends like January 1st of this year. First night I was there, I was sleeping in my 2-person tent with one of my buddies, and I started to hear something walking outside of the tent around 4 a.m. I think it's probably just some animal. There were elk everywhere, who knows, but I'm safe. I try going back to bed, but it sounds like whatever is out there just keeps pacing the tent back and forth. I turn my head so the back is facing the corner of the tent, and it felt like there was something moving its face into the tent trying to smell me. I stay very still, hoping whatever is there goes away. Then all of a sudden, it stomps and just misses my head. I remain still and get the feeling of it moving its head in again. I quickly elbow it, but nothing was there, and I heard no more noises after that, not even running if I spooked it. I grab my pistol that is in the other corner and wake my buddy up and tell him the situation. I open the tent and look outside. Nothing. I still have no clue what that could have been and wished I opened the tent when it was pacing. After spending so much time in the field and hanging out with other wildlife people, I suspect that there are many things the average person would find very weird, but I find normal. At the same time, there are things that the average person might see as normal that are weird as hell to me. Something as simple as seeing crows and starlings flocking together unnerves me, while for most people they would be like, a bunch of birds. The weirdest thing that comes to mind is a bizarre beaver dam I was dealing with yesterday. A beaver had clogged up the control structure for a stormwater pond. That isn't the weird because they do it all the time. Usually they just pile up some sticks on the outside, then pack a bit of mud into it and call it a day. Not this guy. Instead, he decides to crawl into the drainage pipe with the sticks and build the dam in there. He then stacked up more sticks and mud until he reached the top of the structure. All told, there was probably about 5 or 6 feet of concrete pipe that was packed solid. I don't even know how he managed to do it, because even when we just got a trickle of water running through, the current was enough that we were getting worried about being sucked in. Once it was actually clear, it was a powerful torrent that should have swept any beaver away long before they could build anything. I was out climbing in the Rockies around Banff, Canada, with some friends. It was a nice, normal day, and everyone was just working on their routes. It was a quiet area with only a few routes, so it was just the 3 of us out there. All of a sudden, a loud trumpet or deep air horn kind of noise breaks the silence. It goes off a couple of times. No idea what it was, never heard it before, never heard it again. Not something I saw, but rather something I heard. This past summer, my girlfriend and I hiked the Colorado Trail. One morning, we're breaking down our camp and the sun had just come up, so it was still pretty early in the morning, maybe around 6 to 6:30 a.m. We were camped in this long straight valley in the Lost Creek Wilderness for any fellow CT thru hikers. As we're packing up and getting ready to start hiking again, we can hear this crazy screaming sound over and over again for maybe a couple of minutes. It sounded pretty far off, but was echoing through the valley. We both sat there and listened to it, trying to figure out what it was. I've spent a lot of time in the Colorado mountains and have never heard this sound before. At first, we thought it may have been a person, but we were at a fairly remote section of the trail. Once we finished, we did some research, and we think it may have been a mountain lion, as they sometimes will make a similar screaming noise, but who knows. We were both a little nervous to start hiking again after that. Not actually a fish and wildlife biologist, but I practically live in the outdoors. This is pretty mild, but it gave me chills when it happened. So I like to explore and fish a lot. They coincide a lot anyways, so it's a pretty big passion of mine. I was hiking along a creek in a rural county near my home in some dense game land about 8 or so miles from any house, probably at least double that from a major road or settlement. I had hiked for a while and was seeing hardly any sign of human presence. Nearly every place I go to in my state, I can find garbage, hunting, trash, or any other sign that people have been there. If I see nothing, it is sort of a good sign that the area is undisturbed. As I was hiking, I heard gunshots far away. Not uncommon either, but the forest was weirdly quiet, and yes, cliché incoming. I felt super uneasy, as if there was another someone there. Eventually, I found something really strange, and I've looked for the picture forever but can't find it. It was a small metal box, and I was well versed enough to know it was a geocache out in the open at the base of a tree. Let me remind you, this is several miles through thick woods and no sign of human habitation or influence. The box was rusty and looked to have been through a lot. I tried opening it, but a lot of sediment and rust had accumulated, and I got a little give, but nothing significant. There was definitely stuff rattling around, so I tried a ton, but nothing would work. I realized that this story is probably boring, and there was probably nothing even in it, but it seemed very strange to find this so far out. I knew I had to get it open somehow. I left it as I found it, and put a piece of duct tape on the tree next to it to find it again. I left and went home. I downloaded the geocaching app, but the box wasn't registered anywhere, nor were there really any geocaches along the creek at all. None registered for miles, so either it wasn't a geocache or maybe just really old. Anyways, the very next day I went back armed with a crowbar, hammer, and pliers. I went back to the exact spot it was, and I knew it was the right spot. The duct tape was balled up on the ground beside the tree, and the box was nowhere to be found. I looked all around and couldn't find it, at which point, several miles from civilization and several more from cell service, I booked it out of there. I realized this isn't that creepy, spooky, supernatural, etc., but this put me on edge more than anything else I've ever been through. TLDR. Found a box way deep in the middle of some undisturbed woods, marked the spot with tape, came back the next day to find the tape balled up on the ground and the box nowhere to be seen. I'm none of those, but I've lived in rural Maine my whole life. I grew up in a small town called Livermore, and there's a place called the Norlands that still lives like it's the 1800s. It's a place kids take field trips to and learn about the old ways of life, but there's all kinds of spooky shit that happens up there. Anyway, driving in that area one day, I swear I saw what looked like a Bigfoot, except it was in a tree and swung down the branch, then disappeared into the foliage. The thing was massive. It may have been a bird, and I didn't get a good look at it, but what my brain saw was a gorilla Bigfoot creature swinging from the trees. Not really unexplainable, but the most scared I've been in the woods. I was riding my bike home from my girlfriend's house and had to cross through a river area that had just flooded. There were so many glowing things in my bike lights, ghostly looking branches, metal debris, beady animal eyes. It was in the spring and a lot of animals were moving around. Every noise was loud and I had more prickles up my spine than any other time I'd ridden there or in the dark. Super creepy seeing trees on the ground covered in dried clay, looking like huge bones. It felt so strange to be within half a mile of civilization, yet feeling so trapped in the woods.